Hi, Whip. This is Ira. I'm recording here audio feedback on your statement of belief. My aim in doing this is not to evaluate or assess the statement of belief itself, which I thought was great, but rather to help you use the rethinking of some of your own initial thoughts in your final moments of revision for the major essay, the Defining Good Argument in Digital Context essay. So what I'll be doing is I'll be reading back through this, your statement of belief, highlighting some things that I think you've said that are particularly strong or particularly compelling, and also highlighting some places where I want to push you or encourage you to think more systematically. So my basic aim with this feedback is really to help you as you're doing these final revisions in your major essay to be thinking about what it looks like to treat this question of good argument in a systematically theorized way. Generally speaking, too, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed reading this. It's great seeing you thinking about this already in a very lively and interesting way. Basically, you start off by talking about good argument as an ability. It's the ability to express yourself, letting others express themselves, and still respecting each other at the end of the discourse. And bad argument, conversely, is anything that prevents that. So it's self-expression, other expression, and mutual respect. And on the one hand, probably kind of obviously, I'm very sympathetic to that way of thinking about good argument. On the other hand, though, what about contestation, right? So what makes argument different from conversation that's not argument? Let's say just a sort of a general exchange where we're not necessarily in disagreement about anything. We're just talking and getting to know one another. It does seem like there has to be some kind of disagreement or contestation, and so I want to encourage you to think about good argument in terms that also has a way of naming and accounting for that potentially oppositional character. After all, argument's not the same thing as other forms of discourse that include self-expression, other expression, and mutual respect at the end. And the sort of unspoken premise of this first statement is that there is something about argument that threatens the possibility of mutual respect. And I want to encourage you to get more into that as you're working on the final moments of revision on the Defining Good Argument in Digital Contexts essay. So what I'm asking you to do really is just to be thinking about what is it about argument that is threatening mutual respect, and what about that is important or even valuable? So what is argument for in that sense? You say that good argument invites collaboration and furthers research and thought. It's an ingredient in the construction of a healthy society. Again, so this is all stuff that I'm broadly in agreement with. Not that that matters, but more importantly, it's all stuff that only speaks to part of what good argument is. And I think we need a little bit more of a sense of, okay, but what distinguishes argument from other things that are also like that? So argument should bring people together, and bring people together in what context or for what reason? I think is this question that I'm asking, and part of why I'm asking is because I think what's at stake here, although I agree that by and large we are naturally curious, we're also something more than just curious, right? We tend to contest, or we tend to disagree, and an argument, it seems to me, has to have something to do with that contestation or disagreement, or else it's not argument. It's just another form of discourse that's, one of the many kinds of conversation that aren't argument. Now, so I don't say that you have to agree, but I do want to encourage you to think about what makes argument different from other forms of discourse that address the various points that you make that you see as important parts of good argument. I think this idea that something about argument enables us to engage with broader or deeper perspectives, I think is really valuable. And I'm not going to keep repeating my first point, but just do keep that in mind, right? What about argument is different in how we do this than, say, having a conversation that's not an argument with a stranger in a cafe. And I think it has something to do with this question of validity. And I want to ask you what you mean about valid, because often when we say important and valid, we mean very different things. And so I'm curious whether you see those as being the same or you see them as being different. And if the same, how? What is it that they are? What does validity mean here? And if different, what tensions are there between things that are valid and things that are important to people? What would make those different, and how would that impact your definition? And I think, one of the things you do here that is, it's actually a very effective argumentative strategy but it's not as fully systematizing as I want to encourage you to be, is you acknowledge like kind of a limit case. Granted, you say, some people need to be restrained from executing their argument, but for the most part, normal human argument, blah, blah, blah. And the blah, blah, blah is not like what you're saying is boring. I'm just, going through. Normal human argument, da, da, da. All right, cool, fine, good. But what is it that makes those people need to be restrained? What is it that makes their argument, I don't know, potentially not valid? How is that at odds with other people's argument? What makes it so that there are some forms of argument that people offer, that people make, that we should dismiss in what makes that viable or acceptable or reasonable, given everything else you've said about what we should be doing? So in other words, what makes some arguments so bad that we should not engage with them in the way that you're talking about as being good argument? And I think thinking about that should be helpful in thinking about what argument is as a form of discourse, and also then correspondingly, what makes the different things that you see as important parts of good argument, rather than just parts of good discourse or good communication more generally. And so like here we start to get into some of this, I think. Sit down and shut up and listen. Cool, with you. And being able to defend your position while being willing to listen to what others say and take the parts of their argument that you agree with and add it to yours to form an expanding and inclusive set of beliefs about the world. And here I feel like, all right, now we're starting to get into the meat of what's good argument. So there's positions, there's defending, and if there's defending, then there's attacking, right? No attack, no defense. So there's something more contestatory, oppositional, conflictual that has to be part of the milieu, at least in this way of talking about it. And yet that's offset by being willing to listen and being willing to do something with other people's argument. And this is then the goal we get, to form an expanding and inclusive set of beliefs about the world. And that, when you get there, now you're telling us what argument is for. It's for shaping our view of the world. It's for and shaping it through some kind of contestation, and at the same time some kind of willingness to listen, and at the same time we're literally mentally doing something with other people's arguments. And so I want to encourage you to expand on this and think about it a little more systematically. Use moments like this to draw together and explain the links between some of the other moments. Now, here you lose me a little bit. I mean, it's an important ruling, and, it's important that Robert's conservative. part of a political movement, often opposed to the rights of same-sex people, writes a ruling in support of same-sex marriage. And so I think I get why you're going there as an example. It makes sense to me. But I also kind of wonder, I mean, would we argue at all if we were just interested if we were not interested in whether other people's lives and ideas are good ideas? I mean, I wonder, so that's Roberts, Justice Roberts' assertion in the ruling, but that ruling is the conclusion of the case. That's a case that was argued very hotly. And so, for what I would take to be good reasons, I mean, I think it's a really important ruling in terms of the rights of same-sex couples to marriage, yada yada yada. But in terms of what kind of example is this of good argument, I don't know. He's articulating a conclusion. So I kind of want to push you on that spot a little bit. I'm not persuaded that this is how argument should be, because I'm not persuaded that this statement, whether same-sex marriage is a good idea, should be of no concern to us, is really a statement that is part of an argument. That's the court's decision. That's the court's conclusion. But before that, there was an awful lot of arguing based on the very practical assertion that by each side, that the other side's beliefs did not have the right to determine how we live together in public. So I think that's really important, right? Each side in that case is arguing before it gets to the decision by the court. But each side in the case is arguing that the other side's beliefs should not be determinative of how we live together in public spaces. And I think that's really important, because what's happening there is much more contestatory than you're making it sound like here. I'm not saying I don't agree with the points that you're making about listening and understanding. I really do. I mean, I think, obviously, I guess, right? I mean, given how the course has gone. So I value a lot of the things that you're saying we should value. But I also really want to push you to account more fully for the ways in which argument involves a lot of contestation that isn't just accepting other people's beliefs. And so, like, as you're moving through these final moments of revision, I want to encourage you to stick with the things that form the core values here, right? And these are things like ability to accept when you're wrong in an argument, and thinking about how good argument is accepting the other's point of view without accepting their word as doctrine or truth, or forcing yourself to think what they do. So like you're saying, good argument requires us to take a certain attitude toward one another. It requires us to accept that our others are starting where they're starting, and to value that. So I want to encourage you to keep these values, okay? But I also want to encourage you to more systematically tie them together and more systematically work out how they fit into a notion of good argument that's specific to argument in particular, and not just conversation in general. And that's, the same with humility, maturity, and respect. I think this is a really good point, and it's also a point where effectivity and ethicality are maybe at odds, right? So one of the ways we often think about argument is in terms of persuading the other, and being humble is not always the best way to do that. And so it would be helpful for you to say, so why, even if this is not the most effective form of persuasion, is this valuable in a context where people are often concerned with persuasion or often concerned with contestation. Then finally, I just want to encourage you, as you're going into the different parts of your major essay, the Defining Good Argument in Digital Context essay, as you're going through that essay, I want to encourage you, obviously this is fine for the statement of belief, it's not what we're doing for this, but for that, I encourage you to make sure that you're cleanly tying your definition back into digital contexts. So again, the statement of belief is great. I mean, it really is. It's enjoyable, interesting reading, and nice to see how thoughtfully you're engaging with what we're up to here. But also, in the major essay, I want to make sure that you're tying things back in throughout to the digital contexts part and thinking about how do digital contexts maybe shape our arguments differently than the more interpersonal interactions that are your examples in this essay. I enjoyed reading this. I'm really looking forward to reading that. And thanks.